Hi guys, I hope that you're well. I am talking about the subject of contempt tonight and how this subject is relevant not just to interpersonal relationships, intimate relationships, but also how it feeds into our worldview and the way that we look at our leaders, and how this is also relevant to peace work. Okay, so let's dive right in. First of all, contempt. How do we define what it is? Well, you've heard the expression contempt of court, right? So that's where someone comes into court and they don't really abide by the rules of court. They don't respect the authority of the judge nor of the court, and so whatever infraction, whatever they do in that system in court, they get thrown out for that, for contempt of court, or they get jail time for it, because otherwise it means that the authority is not being respected. However, that's not the kind of contempt I want to talk about. The contempt I want to talk about today is sort of defined as a combination of hatred or intense dislike and profound disrespect. Okay? Because for a relationship to be sustainable, there has to be respect. And a key feature of really abusive relationships is a lack of respect, a deep contempt, a lasting hostility, a sort of a persistent hostility, almost like people are together but they're enemies, right? So it's sort of a contradiction. Why would you be with someone who's your enemy? But this is a very common feature of abusive or toxic relationships. And I would define toxic as more where the power imbalance is not necessarily the issue. It's just that both people are not treating one another well for whatever reason and have chosen to remain in the relationship but just don't have the skills nor the will to make the relationship work. I can hear police sirens in the background. So when we're talking about contempt in a relationship where there's abuse, and what we're really meaning when we talk about an abusive relationship is usually a relationship where there's a dominant aggressor. So there's one person who's using abusive tactics in a patterned, cyclical manner to dominate the other person. And there's a myriad of reasons as to how people develop this type of behavior, usually associated with developmental problems in that person that we could probably, a psychologist or a psychiatrist would diagnose as a personality disorder or someone having traits of a personality disorder. So when we have that type of person, and I'll talk about personality disorders in another video, but you're perfectly capable, if you're not sure and you don't really understand what they are, to get online and Google them. It's not difficult to find information. But when we're talking about an abusive dynamic, what we're really talking about is this power imbalance, where someone who's stronger in some way is able to abuse their power and to dominate another person. They may not even be stronger, but they're willing to weaponize or use whatever it takes to subjugate the other person, okay? And that's why when we're talking about violence, we're talking about it on a spectrum or of severity. We're also talking about it in terms of different types of violence used, but something that's, I believe, always there in a violent relationship, whether it ever escalates to physical or sexual violence, there's always the presence of psychological abuse. And a feature of psychological abuse is contempt. Contempt is this hostility combined with a profound disrespect for the other person. And how does it show up? Well, it doesn't always show up necessarily in the words being spoken. It may not just be about insulting or verbally abusing someone. It may well also be just in the tone of voice, right? Someone who sneers at you, like that, they look at you like that, they narrow their eyes. There's a tone of voice that feels menacing, threatening, and it feels like a kick in the guts. Whatever they're saying feels like they're hitting below the belt. They're using things against you in a very sort of, I don't know, it's unjust, effectively. What's coming to mind for me now is a word in French, a set of words in French. We call it de mauvaise foi, right? Which means, when I translate it, it means in bad faith, right? They're using something against you that you told them in confidence, or that you told in all sincerity while you're being your authentic self, describing something you're proud of, or that you just take as natural in defining yourself in some way. It might be a talent, it might be something you're good at, it might be something that that helps you define who you are as an individual, and they weaponize that back against you in an intellectually dishonest way, basically, in a way that is disproportionate and dishonest and distorted, right? So that can be a feature of contempt as well. But basically, it's largely more to do with how they talk to you. This posture of heavy hostility, disrespect, and disapproval, right? So a big part of that contempt is disapproval. It's like you end up feeling like a naughty kid. It can trigger deep feelings of shame and distress and confusion, because you're like, but hang on a minute, I just asked you a question. What can trigger this contempt in someone who's abusive? Like a shame storm, like a torrent of crazy abuse at you, could be one simple thing. You might just be asking for something from them. And I know those of you out there who've been in abusive relationships, you know what I'm talking about, right? You're just trying to kind of sort out something really simple with the person. You're coming to them with maybe a bit of an issue you have, and you'd like to address that, but you're really coming with a posture of conciliation, conciliatory, right? Or you're coming to them even with like you're actually making a gesture of love, of wanting to spend more time with the person. But somehow that sets them off, and suddenly you find yourself at the end of this barrage of criticism and kind of stuff is incoherent. It doesn't even make sense, right? Half of it's nonsense. And if you were not so stressed out in the moment, so appalled at the way the person is speaking to you, you might even laugh because it's so ridiculous and irrational, right? But it's really designed to subjugate you into believing that you're bad, and to demonize you. So contempt in a very heavy, disproportionate and persistent manner that's present in abusive relationships is weaponized in this really intellectually dishonest way to convince you that you are just simply a bad person, right? To demonize or villainize you in the situation, and often in ways that are just totally and completely absurd and irrational, okay? So that is abusive contempt, and if you recognize that that's what's happening to you in a relationship, but it hasn't got to the point where the person has actually physically assaulted you, you might be under the illusion that the person's a bit difficult, and you're in a difficult relationship with someone who's a bit difficult. You might even be believing that you're bad. You might even be carrying shame and guilt. So if that's you, please stop and reevaluate what's going on, right? Really look back at do maybe like a chronology of things, events, and rethink what's really been happening. Because if you're experiencing a disproportionate amount of disapproval, criticism, it's unrelenting, and it just feels like this, you know, they're making a massive mountain out of a molehill, out of a bunch of things. That might be a situation you're dealing with, which is actually psychological abuse. And if you continue in that, eventually, particularly if it's crippling your self-confidence, it could lead you down a very dark path, and the person may eventually become physically abusive. But even if they haven't become physically abusive, and you can't believe that they're going to, it's going to destroy your sense of self and your self-esteem. So it's really important to deal with that now, to look it in the face and take it seriously now, because it's only going to get worse. So that's contempt, right? That's contempt in an interpersonal context, and that can happen in lots of different situations. It might be in an intimate partner relationship, like in a sexual relationship. It could be in a friendship, and it could be, say, with your boss. So someone who's super controlling, or someone who's got a certain amount of power over you, and what they want to do is they want to deflect away sort of attention from their own poor behaviours, and maybe they're on that narcissistic spectrum. And so a great thing they've learnt, it may just be subconscious, but they have learnt to weaponize contempt, to distort things, to subjugate people around them, to use them in a way, to use this kind of really crazy, disproportionate contempt and disapproval to have you doubting yourself, okay? Now, getting on to the question of peace and peace work, because this is also something that's important to connect, is what about if I'm contemptuous towards others? What if I detect contempt within myself? Okay, none of us are perfect. Let's start off by saying none of us are perfect, and we're all human. We can all feel this stuff, right? We can all feel contempt, anger, rage, hostility towards others, but that doesn't make us a violent perpetrator. That just makes us human, right? And there are circumstances where even within intimate relationships, feeling contempt and to some extent expressing it in a non-abusive fashion, or even losing our temper and on very, very seldom occasions saying something we shouldn't, is really just a sign that things have gone super awry in our relationship, and we no longer respect and trust the person that we're in a relationship with. So an example of where that might happen would be if they've done something that severely betrayed our trust. We, in good faith, have trusted the person, and they have done something that we're disgusted by, right? Maybe they've cheated on us, or they've done something else really quite serious that's a major betrayal that has deeply hurt us. Maybe they've assaulted us. If your partner has assaulted you or has verbally abused you, denigrated you, they can be worthy of your contempt, right? The key issue with this is that we don't stay in relationships with people we can't respect, because then we become the bad guy. Then we become the person who becomes abusive, right? If we can't find a way to respect our partner, then it's not healthy. And so we have to reevaluate. We have to think about, can we forgive, or can we work on the way that we perceive the person we're with? If we've decided to stay after they've cheated or they've done something wrong, we have to work at the dynamics enough that we can own our own choices, so that we don't treat that person pervasively in a disrespectful and contemptuous manner, because then we are being abusive, right? So that's something to look at in a healthy relationship. And if you've gotten into that dynamic with your partner, you want to be avoiding that type of dynamic. You want to go and maybe look at the Gottman's Institute. The Gottman Institute's a great, I don't I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I have used them as a great reference tool. A lot of therapists do the same, have done the same. And so I've looked at that, and many of my friends as well have looked at the Gottman Institute, because they have absolutely wonderful resources, okay, on relationships and on how to get away from contempt in a relationship, right? So if you know you're not in any real danger, you know that it's not that your partner is abusing you, but there are times when it's hard to respect them. Just be really, really careful, right? Same with your friends, same with people you work with. It's really important that we be mindful of contempt creeping into our own attitude. When we find it hard to respect another person, maybe we disagree with them, or maybe they've done things we disapprove of. Just remembering that contempt isn't very helpful if you want to maintain a relationship with someone. That said, there are times, as I've just mentioned, that feeling that contempt is a necessary barometer for realizing that, wow, okay, we're dealing with someone who's dangerous and who is, that we really can't afford to trust, because it would be naive, it would be being a Pollyanna to trust them. And that can apply for personal relationships or work, and it can also apply for the political context. This is why so many people are cynical about politicians, right? So many people express contempt towards leaders. However, that's something I also want to talk about. There are definitely leaders in the world who have committed horrific human rights abuses, where, it's healthy to hold them in contempt and not to trust them, because honestly, we know that they have war criminals, or they've done things that basically mean that they're probably a psychopath, okay? Not every politician deserves that kind of contempt. And I do notice people talking about politicians in such a pervasively cynical way. Oh, I don't trust politicians, they're all the same, they're all corrupt. If that's the case, how do we build a better world, right? We have to kind of try to preserve a little bit of innocence in us and a little bit of hope. And so that's where checking on our level of contempt, and whether it's a bit disproportionate for what someone's done, maybe a leader, recognizing that being a politician, being a leader is a very hard job. It's very hard. That's why most of us aren't politicians. We're couch politicians. We sit on the couch. We have an opinion. It's easy to criticize, yeah? It's easy to cast stones and aspersions at others, but we couldn't do that job. So that's where also on a piecework level, people who are truly incredible in brokering peace, people who are very brave, people who are peace activists, or people who work in jobs which require that they go where angels fear to tread, are those who are able to hold these things, these contradictions, and still try to find some kind of hope. Right? Still try to believe in the possibility that a person can be redeemed somehow, that some of the things they have done may have caused us to lose total trust in the goodness in that person, and yet somehow we have to be able to work with people who have done some shocking things. Now, a good example that comes to mind for me is Northern Ireland. I have Northern Irish heritage, right? How on earth did the Northern Irish come to some kind of reconciliation and peace, and how can I say this? Sort of like it come to some sort of peace in Northern Ireland. Stop the fighting, bring ceasefire and have some form of peace in Northern Ireland. When you think about what both sides did to one another, the degree of terrorism, the blowing up of schools, right? How do you broker peace with people who've on both sides have committed really like awful acts where you know that someone you love was killed by the people sitting opposite. That takes a tremendous amount of courage and faith to go in and to negotiate that. And most of us can't imagine doing that, right? So that's what I'm talking about when we're looking at our politicians, our leaders. I'm not saying be naive. I'm not saying tolerate corruption. Don't denounce things that are wrong. But this basic value system, and I was taught this by my mum, is try to separate the person from the behaviour, right? Because we all screw up. Some of us very severely. Some of us are in a pattern of screwing up, and it means actually we really lack all integrity and we can't be trusted because we never take responsibility and we transfer responsibility to others for things we've done. We blame others, right? That's a typical abuser. Sure, don't trust someone who does that. But do give the people out there who are stepping up into this incredibly frightening, difficult role where you have to be incredibly thick-skinned, give them a chance and let them be human. Forgive them mistakes. You don't have to demonize every politician just because they haven't done a perfect job, just because you didn't like or you disagreed with something. You get to still respect that person for trying, for getting up there. Okay, they were corrupted. Okay, they brokered a deal that you feel was a bit off, right? Where is their humanity? Do they have humanity? So when we're talking about contempt, what I'm trying to say is let's try to suspend judgment and know that there are a lot of people who go into politics and leadership positions who are actually really there because they want to make a difference. Let's try to see that humanity in these people and understand that they are doing their best a lot of the time. Yes, there are some that really honestly have been corrupted. There's still a human being who started out with hope. There are those politicians who are definitely in it because they have a particular business interest, right? They have something that they just want to change within the legislation so they can benefit directly and make a profit. Sure, that's an issue. That's something we need to watch out for. But let's us look at the contempt that we carry within ourselves towards others when we judge very swiftly, when we refuse to think in a more modulated, is modulated the right word? We refuse to mitigate or to consider the grey areas, when we're too black and white ourselves, because a feature of emotional immaturity is being black and white. It's putting people on a pedestal and then it's knocking them off it. They're either wonderful or they're terrible. You either worship them or you love to hate them, right? Let's get away from that. That's dichotomizing black and white thinking. That is a feature of people who are immature. That's what people who are abusive do to their victims. They put them on a pedestal, they idealize them, and then they knock that person off the pedestal and they demonize them, right? And they spend the rest of their time trying to redeem themselves in the other person's eyes. Let's not do that to those out there brave enough or silly enough trying to lead us, because they are simply human beings, right? Imperfect human beings. So, and the other thing that I want to suggest is that if we want to build healthier communities, we have to encourage our children and young people to develop empathy, to develop integrity, because integrity and self-honesty is what is lacking in those who are abusive. People who are abusive, who are on that narcissistic spectrum, they are self-delusional. They are incapable of holding and tolerating shame, right? Because of the deep wounds, what we call narcissistic wounding. And either they've been insulated from actually recognizing that they're no more special than anyone else. They've been taught to believe that they are a prince or princess, they are the best and they're better than everyone else, and therefore they haven't learnt the skills that are required for living in this world, okay? Or they have been so devalued and they've been so invalidated, that they've never developed any sense of self whatsoever, or it's an incomplete sense of self. And that means they have very limited empathy. They're unable to see us. They're unable to see themselves because of that lack of a sense of self, that lack of proper individuation, which is required for an ability to empathize. And so when we're talking about people like that, who are unable to tolerate shame and who therefore will reflexively project onto us, this is where we get to recognize that in someone and go, okay, you're too immature to lead us. You don't have the integrity required. But if you see that a politician has the guts to get up and admit that they're wrong, wow, that's someone that you can trust as a leader. And I'm not talking about empty platitudes, apologies, and then they go and do the same thing over and over again, and they blame someone else for what they did, okay? Same thing, perpetrator cycle. But if you've got someone who is humble enough to get up and say, I screwed up, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, right? That's what we want in a leader. We want people who are prepared to try, to give it a go, to make mistakes and to admit they're human. And I can think of some leaders like that in the world. Can you? That's the challenge I put to everyone. Can you find the people you believe in? You don't expect them to be perfect. Expect them to make mistakes. Expect them to disappoint you. Expect them to do things you disagree with and still see them as a human being who is trying. But someone who's prepared to talk to you, who's humble, who's able to admit their mistakes, those are the people we want to have leading us. The people who are brave enough to try, who are brave enough all the same to take decisions, even in the face of people really disagreeing, still taking into consideration other people's views and listening to people, right? And who have enough self-compassion that this doesn't sort of, that, you know, they've got enough of that healthy self-esteem that they can feel shame, feel embarrassed, and tolerate that feeling long enough to forgive themselves and keep trying and admit their mistakes and move forward and with integrity and with faith, right? But people can't do that. Leaders can't do that without help from the public. We have got to stop supporting perpetrators and narcissists in our political systems. We've got to stop expecting our politicians to be superhuman and recognize that what we want in our leaders are people who have integrity. But that's on us as well, to vote them in, and also to recognize within ourselves our unreasonableness, our putting people on a pedestal, our black and white thinking, our expecting, sorry, tonight I can't talk properly. Are expecting people to be more than we are, right? To be better than we are, and in ourselves not recognizing our own hypocrisy, okay? And when I say that, I'm just as guilty of this stuff. I'm just as guilty of putting people on pedestals, of knocking them off, of being disappointed, of, you know, dismissing the person. I've been guilty of doing that in the past, and I've had to sort of think about why I'm doing that, because that is an immature reflex, right? So I hope what I've said has been in some way useful to you. By all means, leave a comment about what you think. Please do so respectfully without contempt. And I wish you peace, love, and all the blessings in your life. Please like and subscribe and continue to follow me if you agree or if you're interested in what I've got to say, because I have a message to get out there about non-violence, about peace work, about the link between ourselves, our individual self, and the macro, the rest of the world. Something we call peace work in the positive mode, which is just about being able to look at how we, in our own ways, from where we're sitting right now at home, can act more peacefully upon the world and build a more peaceful world for ourselves and others from a grassroots level up. All right, take care, love to you all, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Bye.